Yeah, thank you everyone for joining on time. I think that's like fabulous to have such a good participation, the very go itself. So my name is Santosh. I am part of I'm a co-founder of DataOGram, and we are on a mission to make technology affordable and accessible to the social sector. Um, However, technology is one aspect of how you can build a strong organization. Capacity is one of a very key element to build a very strong and sustainable organization. That is where we started this monthly webinar series where we get knowledge experts from the industry to come and talk to the community, and we want to grow and build this community. Our previous session on data was very well received, and thank you for that feedback. And most of you wanted a session on grants and fundraising. And grants is, of course, a great way for not-for-profits to receive a handsome sum of money funding to sustain their organization. So here we have with us two panelists, both of them who don't need much of an introduction, but I will still do that. So Havovi is the CEO of Save the Children India. She was earlier leading the monitoring and evaluation vertical for Magic Bus. She's had 20 plus years of experience in the sector and experience in raising large money in the form of grant as well. So welcome, Havovi. And we have Divya Raghunandan, who is the Director of Mission Advancement at Rootbridge. She was earlier the leading the vertical at APPI, which is Azim Premji Philanthropic Initiative. They were helping institutional capacity building for mid-sized organization. Before APPI, Divya was also co-founder of Common Ground Collective and spent close to 15 plus years at Greenpeace. So welcome, Divya, as well. So thank you for taking time out and joining this event. The broad structure, for the interest of everyone who's here, we will be having a quick knowledge sharing session with each panelist, after which we will move to a Q&A session where it's going to be open to all the people who have joined in. Of course, I have lots of questions myself, and there have been questions which have come in, while in the form of application. So we will do that piece as well. But before moving in, it will be really helpful. I'm just going to launch a poll, where you can share your experience in grant application. There are three options. This is for the attendees. Whether you have secured any grants before, whether you have, or if you have applied for any grant, or neither. So it'll be great if you can give us that perspective. I'll be publishing the results out so that we can have a more informed conversation around things. So let's wait for half a minute. Should be good enough. Okay. So I'll do the countdown. 10, 5, 1. Okay, I'm ending the poll here. The results out there. Most people have applied for one or more grants, which is great, because then you do have, you will have a lot of questions around that specifically as well. So that's a very useful piece of information. Now, from a Havovi, this one, obviously the first, because grant application is is something that is there top of mind for most people. It will be great if you could set the tone for today's conversation, and also tell us in terms of how have you successfully managed to track grants and to raise grants, and what is the ideal process that you may have followed in your organization that will help people. So it's like it's your experience actually. Yeah.
Thanks, Santosh, and there will be some background noise just because other things happen at home, so please forgive me for that. I think I'm going to just focus on my own experience with fundraising through grants. So I think the first thing to say is that I find every grant writing process or application for grants a very energy consuming process, and in more than one ways. It takes up a lot of time and it takes up a lot of effort, but it takes a lot of emotional energy. So I think the first thing that I would say to anybody who's looking at applying for grants is don't apply for a massive number each year. Hedge your bets, figure out the ones that you really, where there is an alignment of priorities, where there is an alignment in terms of the size of organizations that the grant maker is investing in, where there is an alignment in terms of the larger vision that the grant maker has, even in non-grant related work with your work. I would say first check for alignment at all those levels before you spend time on a grant. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, and that even as I say, I mean, there are the next 2 points will seem a bit contradictory. I think the one thing I learned in the process that I undertook at my previous organization was that there is just nothing as important as writing the first part of the grant, which is where you are saying what it is that you want to do and why it is that you want to do that thing. And that, I think, requires a certain specificity of data. Uh, we tend in the development sector to write very long needs, um, long essays to establish need. Very often you need just 3 or 4 data points. And the more specific you are with them, the stronger you establish the need for the intervention. And similarly, when you talk about your intervention, to be able to talk about it in a way that is clean and in short sentences, and where what you are going to do and what you will achieve by it is really clearly achieved. I think it's the most underrated part of writing a grant proposal, to write cleanly, to use clean data points, and to not give people too much gyan, because I think everybody doesn't want to get the same things over and over again. But if there is a data point that is specific to the work that you do, specific to the kind of population you engage with, it's important to cite that. I'm just saying as a measure of caution here, I think it's really important not to get lazy at this work. Sometimes it takes you days to get the relevant data points, and it's important to put in that effort. It's very easy for us to say, oh, nobody has done this kind of work before. That's not true. Most of the work that we're doing, somebody or the other has done it before. So if we, look long enough and work hard enough and talk to people enough, we will see the echoes of it in other places. That's the second point. The third point, which is that, you have to, at the end of the day, convince people. And so much of applying for a grant, of applying for certain kinds of grants, is about building a relationship of trust and transparency with the person that you are speaking to in the grant making organization. Which means that whoever is anchoring the grant from your organization has to have the capacity to, at least some decision making capacity, and also the capacity to call upon internal resources as much as needed for a grant, for the grant application. And to be able to build, I mean, you don't need to go out for drinks and stuff like that, yeah, with the people that you're applying to. I mean, that's not what I'm saying at all. But because these processes are usually take time, usually you get to know each other, and you will, if you talk to people enough, you will find out where their concerns are. So for example, on grants, sorry, in the past, people have asked me, but the thing that we keep getting is, how will just doing a 30-hour program with children help improve their, let's say, their resilience in engaging with their environment, when nothing else has done that in the last 20 years, So, then if you're talking enough to them, what questions they are receiving, and what are the main questions that you should be answering that capacitize them to take your case forward. So that's the third point. And I think just the last thing I'll say here before I wind this up is that what, again, a little bit in relation to the first point that I made, it's really important for people to have a team working with them. Grants are very, very rarely written by one person. And if the organization doesn't back that person up with support from other people, if the whole team doesn't get behind that grant, there's very little likelihood that you will get it. In my experience, every single grant that we have got has been a highly collaborative, very high intense collaboration kind of experience. Um, and having said that, the last thing is that whoever is doing the anchoring of the grant is project managing it, and there's no substitution for that. Somebody has to project manage it, know what the timelines are, know what the expectations are, keep it clicking along, keep people in touch with the deadlines, all that kind of word limits, all that is so important for so many grants. I think to whoever's writing grants in any organization, I think every grant asks you to do something that you did not think that you were skilled at doing. So you'll have to be prepared to put yourself out there. That's massive risk. But if I could do a budget, then anyone can do anything. So I think there's hope for everyone. Yeah, I'll stop there.
That's really, really positive and encouraging. So clearly alignment of the vision with the grant maker, is there, and the focus on data and the pain behind getting the grant with relevant information really stands out. Thank you, Havovi. Divya, from a grant maker's perspective, now what is it that that works? What are you thinking? What do you want? Just to kind of pick your brains on that.
So I'm going to try and do this, but with a caveat that I'm sure each grant maker, I mean, it's not just one monolith of people sitting there. So from my own experience, I can try and share a couple of things. I think for me, the first thing that I learned at APPI, and strangely, I'm most of my life, I was a program person, and I crossed over at some point. So it was, it's kind of eye-opening for me. And broadly, I would pretty much agree with everything that Havovi said, right? But just stepping into the shoes, let's say, of the leadership of a senior grant, I mean, like an organization like the Azim Premji Philanthropy, I think the first thing is that a grant, in some ways, is like a bridge between the nonprofit that this set of people who are going to make the decision sitting in this room know nothing about. So this grant is actually that story, which in a couple of, either it becomes a little PowerPoint presentation or it is a little report, but this actually tells the entire story of both the organization, the people, the program, the past, and the aspirations for the future. So it's kind of, it has to do all of that and convince, more importantly, a group of people who are possibly very different and speak a very different language, come from a very different background, possibly don't have the context that you who are writing that proposal have. So these are two people almost inhabiting very different worlds, and the grant attempts to be a bit of a bridge between them, right? So it is a bit of a feat, I think, and managing that expectation, because the biggest challenge is that both groups of people haven't spoken enough to each other to know what each other wants, and so which is, and that brings us to that point that Havovi made, which is alignment. So your best case of knowing how to frame your grant and things like that really seems so as a grant maker, what we would do is try and lay out boundaries or parameters. So for example, almost every grant maker has domain areas that they would like to work on based on their interest areas and things like that. So they will be thematic verticals, they will maybe geographic verticals, they may be interests based on geography. They may be, things that they would like to fund and they don't, even within a programmatic thing. So like we like to fund, direct beneficiary work, but we don't like to fund asset creation, like buying a car or buying all of which is very, very important, right? But the point is, there are all these nuances in terms of that. What is your usual funding cycle? So this is, we like to fund in this cycle. We open our funding on a particular date and close it on a particular date. This is a typical window. So when you go to a website, and then there are formats as well, usually. So you will get so you have all sorts of pieces of information that you need to put together, and possibly this project manager puts together from the nonprofit, and tries to make a picture of, okay, this is what I think this organization wants, or this is how they want us to put it together. So, but that's just the outline, the framework, and the parameters. The story is completely yours, right? And so, just back to the point of the fact that, this is a very different group of people, and you have to tell this story. I think I have found at the Azim Premji, when we would receive proposals, when we finally would present it to the board. So I was someone who would craft the proposal from the other side and present it to the board for approval. We would have to, so we would use multimedia, for example. So there would be a little video, because that will be a snapshot into this world that they can't possibly go down into. So there's a little video telling a story of a child or a woman, or an Adivasi, or whoever is the community that that the nonprofit is working with. So there was that story. Then then the other thing is, some people relate to narratives, some people relate to numbers. So you typically have a proposal where you have two kinds of things talking to each other. One is your entire budget sheet or your financials, which may look very dry, but that's a story for some people. So that needs to be told like a number story, and that number story should completely resonate with the narrative story, because there are people, some people who are very important in decision making, who don't like to read the narrative, but when they read your the numbers, it should appear as a story. They should know what you're doing, where you're doing it, with how many people you're doing it, what you've done before, and what your aspirations are for the future. So that entire story comes out just through numbers. And for another group of people, they may not read your numbers. So you need pretty much all of this in words. So I'm just saying that it's different parts of this puzzle that we present. But as any human being, I mean, even all of us, if somebody gave you a proposal, I'm sure you're likely to go to the part that talks to you most. And that it's the same thing that happens there. And so, if somebody actually gets a grip on what you're trying to say, and which goes back to Havovi's point of being, crisp and, how well you can write it, how sharp it can be. That kind of quickly strikes a chord, and people were like, oh yes, this is exactly what they want to do. This is how they want to do it. And this is what they've done before, which shows us that they are highly capable of doing it. And they have an excellent team, and they can actually deliver it. So it becomes a very quick conversation, and then you're actually moving in. So the first thing is that to stick within those parameters, to show how your proposal links to, because everyone's looking for, okay, which thematic is it in? And we do become quite blinkered when we end up having to look at many proposals. So we'll ask ourselves, which thematic, what's the geography? Does it fit into our geography? Does it fit into all our criteria? And then what are they trying to do? And so if you get quickly these answers, and then so if you get these answers, then very quickly you're having a conversation on yes and no, rather than I'm not getting a sense of what this organization is doing. So I think, so for me, that's the experience that we've had. And so to tell that story powerfully and in multiple ways in that same proposal within that format is really what we're looking at. Sunil's frozen, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, he'll be back.
Actually, Divya, was when you were talking, I was just thinking that every time funder has told me to send just a simple table. In the beginning, I used to think, okay, it's just a simple table, right? This is going to be a couple of hours exercise. I remember the end of grant milestones document that we had to submit to APPI. We worked on it for 2.5 months. And every time we worked on it, we thought this was the final. So I think that the thing is that this is just it, right? Sometimes the simplest writing or the simplest tables actually require so much work in the back. And that's where the effort is in grant writing. When you look at it, it looks evident, but that's only because someone has really spent time taking something complex and making it into something that can be understood by, someone who's on the other side of that bridge that you spoke about.
Thank you so much for this. So of course, there is this whole the storytelling part of it. There's this number element of it, the multimedia part of it, which can connect with people. But there's no really. I mean, if as an applicant, is there any way for me to know? Should I give everything? Is it like giving over information? What is the right amount of information? So how do I get to know that? Because not everyone may be able to build that rapport with the grant maker. So how is it really possible for really small NGOs, for example? How do they go about that?
Yeah, so that goes back to the bit. I mean, maybe Havovi can add, but that goes back to what Havovi was saying about. I mean, I really think that the first step for an organization, and I like to go one step even before writing that grant proposal, is to have a fundraising strategy. As people in nonprofits, all of us would spend a lot of time thinking through the program and would have a fantastic program laid out. Your milestones, where you want to get, but very often that level of energy is not put into fundraising, right? And the way I see it, the minute you know what you want to do, you have to ask yourself, how is that going to be supported? And it's an iterative process of actually doing that. So in the sense that you start building your fundraising strategy, and the fundraising strategy has things like, what kind of money do we need, right? Do we need, because you need restricted money for certain things. That is, a certain project can get tied funds. But then you need some money for overheads, because maybe people's salaries won't come completely from that grant. So you need some untied funds and unrestricted. And so where does that come from? You need some short-term money for events and projects and reports and things like that. But you need some long-term money because you want to stay on the ground and work for 5 years, and no less than 5 years would mean anything. Or you want to innovate, and you won't have bolted down plans for a new geography or something like that. So the thing is to design what is your mix of fundraising, and then curating who could possibly be. And then you'll also have to map out who are the funders. And then you're saying there are so many kinds of funders, right? One is, there's the international, there is domestic, there is corporate, there is institutional, there may be high net worth individuals who also are part of maybe corporations or institutions, but want to give their individual money. So there is this huge landscape. I think fortunately now, rather than everyone trying to reinvent it, there are organizations that actually help you with this, right? Maybe a little later I can put in a link of this organization that I was recently introduced to, called Tamaku, which I think charges 1 rupee for every day of the year, so 365 rupees a year. And every day they curate all the organizations that are putting out grant proposals. So basically it's a really nice thing to have, because somebody is curating this, and maybe for a little bit more, maybe 500 rupees a year or something, they curate it for yourself, for your organization, and they create the matches. So somebody needs to, I mean, a lot of large organizations have fundraising people who kind of map the landscape and make a match between what you want to do and what funders are doing. So once you've got that match and you've zeroed it down, then you've got an organization that you want to write a grant to. I think almost all organizations don't ask you to send in a cold proposal. And it's very graded. It's at a in a stage by stage manner. So I'll give you the example at the philanthropy. It would first be a concept note, which is just 1 page of saying, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is our website, and things like that. And then there's a little form where you literally fill out all the details. It's, of your organization and things like that, the basic compliances and things. So which kind of, it's like the first barrier of saying, okay, the organization's eligible for the grant. So that, that's very clearly crossed. And then you move into the next stage where they start asking you a little bit more in detail about, and then to see and then it's literally a form that you have to fill up the tabs. So it's not that you have to imagine what you have to do. And then as you go deeper down, what starts happening is the slightly more painful process where, as the team who is assigned to the nonprofit to kind of work this grant out, they need to start getting all sorts of information ready. So for example, you need the past 3 years performance indicators, or the past 3 years budgets that went with that. And this information may not be in the form. It may be at a very sketchy level. So you may need some data which goes back. So then what happens is there's a back and forth to get more information. So usually it's a guided process and it's not a cold process. And ideally, it's not a good idea to just shoot off a proposal to an organization without knowing or going to the website, making sure that you know what the process and the steps are. And right now, I think almost all funders have a very clear step-by-step hoops that you literally need to go through. Which is why you'll hear people saying that I wrote the first, went through the first part and the second part, and then I didn't hear from them for a long time. These are the frustrations as well. But I think it is a guided process. So I don't think people are expecting you to do this. But the reason why I talked about budgets and the narratives and maybe the audio visual, if you do have any, including photographs and things like that, is that it's not a bad idea to create some sort of a master set by a cross-functional team in your organization as part of your fundraising strategy, to say that, okay, this is what we want the money for. This is a story we are going to tell, and this is our number story to match it. And this is the evidence of all the work that we've done before, right? And that's a master set kind of thing, which is pulled together from all the work you've already done in the documents. And then you can cut and slice and dice and curate for various organizations, or maybe 2 or 3 funders that you are applying to at the same time. So that can happen. But this information, the more you have with it, as well as all your compliance information for your organization, if you have all of that at one place and readily accessible, it's much easier to go through this process and fill up the necessary forms. You're on mute, Santosh.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Divya, for that. And in fact, this actually, this one of the questions that we received, and Havovi, it would be great to have your thoughts, is in line with what Divya said, putting everything together. But can I use the same content for multiple grants? That's a question, and if yes, how? Yeah, so.
Yeah, no, certainly you can. Hopefully we're not telling different stories depending on who the funder is. We're not telling the substance of the story is not different, hopefully. And so, yes, you can. But then what you need is the kind of content that Divya just mentioned, which is the master story of the organization. Last 5-year story, next 5-year story, right? Both in numbers and in narrative and in outcomes of the organization. And if you have that, yes, then it will be that is the content that you will repurpose for any grant that you write. So a certain amount of the material, yeah, certainly you can do that with. But the worst thing that we can do is to assume that when we say something like this, then we mean copy and paste, because that's not what we mean. When we say the content can be used or the content can be repurposed, it means that you don't have to go back and to create numbers, or you don't have to go back to pull out information from the raw data. You do that and you keep it, but your writing can never be copy and paste. And I think as soon as a reader gets the feeling that you're doing that, I mean, if you even think of us, and even anybody, I'm saying anybody, if you get the feeling that this has been said somewhere before and you've been lazy in writing it, no one's going to respond well to that kind of thing. Santosh, if it's okay, can I just also respond to a point that Divya had made about you had asked, because not everybody can build that kind of conversation or relationship with whoever's anchoring at the funder. I'm saying I think you can. It's just different degrees. So we've been applying for grants recently, it's, for me, it's the coldest grant writing process I've ever been in, ever been part of. But even there is someone whom you can address questions to. And in my experience, if you ask a specific question, you get a specific answer. So there is no, that's what I think, that point that Divya made is so well taken, right? So don't think that you have to go in cold. You don't have to go in cold. It's just that you have to put in effort. And nobody is going to tell you कि ये करने से तुमको grant मिल जाएगा, वो नहीं बोला जाएगा. But that there is steps that you have to go through, and that it will be a guided process. That at least that much you will know with any grant that you are writing. So there will be an intent to apply, or a concept note, or something else that has to be submitted before a full proposal is asked for.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I think this would encourage many NGOs to actually reach out before they they just submit a piece of paper. So at this point, I'll just pause and request the attendees, if you have any question, please raise your hand. I'll unmute you so that you can ask. So this particular question. Okay, so we have Amrit. Amrit, I'm just going to unmute you a bit. If you want to ask, you can ask your question before we move on.
Yeah, hi. This is Amrit Deshmukh. I'm a social entrepreneur, but I have few revenue streams of my own. So am I eligible, because I'm not purely a non-profit, because I'm having some revenue streams to cover the costs, of course, not to maximize profits, only to cover the cost. So am I eligible for grants?
Amrit, it will have to be based on how you are registered, right? So if you are registered, so you're saying you're registered as a for-profit entity, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so the grant, so again, it depends on the grant maker. At the Azim Premji Philanthropy, we were very clear that we would only give grants to non-profits. But there are organizations that actually would give some form of a grant. It could be an impact fund, or it could be some such formulation that you would be eligible for. So where it's not about equity, but it's about the impact that you commit to. And there would be a way of tracking that. So it's there will be organizations of a slightly different nature, possibly not the same organizations that offer grants to nonprofits. Though there may be some who are doing a bit of both, but in my understanding, it's the nonprofit world would largely have to be a society, a trust, a Section 8. To be able to receive these grants, because in most cases you would also there would be a tax exempt certificate, an ATG as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Amrit. Okay, now this is something which is very close to me. So what do you give any weightage to how the organization is leveraging technology in the current scheme of things, over the last 5 years, maybe? I mean, has that been a factor in allowing or approving grants or application? I mean, from both perspectives. I mean, I would like to hear from both of you.
Go ahead, Divya.
Okay, so I mean, I think the one of the big links that we've seen in the recent past with technology is the whole idea of measuring and monitoring and evaluation, right? I mean, especially if you're working at scale, it's almost impossible to manage without some level of technology and having access to that. So at least, but there's also a recognition that it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? If you don't get funding to build that, then how are you going to build that? And so with every grant proposal, you'll have to say, we'd love to do it, but we don't have money to do it. So please give us money. So at the philanthropy that I was, we did recognize the fact that if an organization said that was a need and they wanted to grow and they needed that, as part of their overheads, we didn't have like a percentage of overheads. Usually funders, say that you can only spend a certain percentage, 10 or 15%, in some cases 20% on your core costs. Otherwise, it has to be directly on the program. So at the philanthropy, we believe that we need to enable a lot of NGOs to be able to start building a little bit of a tech vertical, where you have that level of expertise, and so we would build in that cost, provided the organization was very keen on doing it and had a plan, or some sort of a plan. But it is pretty critical, because it's if you don't have that level of basic level of tech, then it's very hard to measure, and then it's hard to do your reporting in a clear way, especially if you have scale. So that kind of is becoming, I think, quite a requirement right now. But it's also the sad bit. There are a lot of organizations struggle to kind of make the cut in the beginning, because nobody's invested in that so far.
I agree. I think it is very chicken and egg. And I think the response to this question changes almost every month. I'll be honest. I felt very differently about this a year ago. Today, I don't think that we can do applications at scale, for any kind of scale actually, or even for innovation, without a measure of technology in some form or the other. And what really interesting, the CEO of Arman the other day was talking, and he was talking about how at Arman they believe that it can never just be tech; it will always be tech and touch. And I think that that's really, if we stop polarizing this question, is it technology or is it people? It's never going to be is it technology or is it people. If we accept it's always going to be an and, then there's no struggle. Then the question is, which kind of funder will be able to support what kind of tech and for what reason? So if this is a funder, for example, we have met recently people who want to help us to measure better, because ours has been, STCI has been very much an implementation organization, really strong programs, not that great on the data management and optimization side. So there are people who are interested in helping us develop that. They will their interest is also in helping us to develop the technology to do that on a sustained basis. Some of the programmatic funders have told us, that's a good idea, do it, but I won't give you all the money. So literally it's like getting 50,000 from here, a lakh from there, putting it together, and then being able to do what you can with technology. I will also say that it's always your program that will decide now what kind of tech you want or what kind of tech you should have. Always, it can never be the other way around. And the best part of it right now is that right technology need not cost you very much at all. If you just are speaking to the right people, and yeah, I think it's just not a big hawa. Even till about a couple of years ago it was, and I don't think it's like that anymore.
Right.
Just one thing I wanted to add, sorry, if I can, to that, is that I think there's also the other side of when there is an to kind of in the excitement that funders have to kind of build technology, you end up actually building solutions that are not usable. Because again, there's also this huge divide of where, people are so good in community organizing. They can go there and rally up a massive community and fill a whole bunch of forms, and you have all that data. So it's not like people are not collecting data and people don't have all the responses. It's but the thing is, the minute it becomes a complex tech solution, or I mean, it may not be complex for an IT person or a tech person, but when you bring it to the ground and it has to go to that office in that small tier 2 town with erratic electricity and internet and all of that, then it starts becoming a huge burden. And then slowly, from it being entered in that system, it goes back to the Excel sheet or something simpler. So you might as well start with something simpler and stay that way and build up. So I mean, at least I'm a huge believer in let the technology be as basic, as simple, because it has only one function, to kind of bring it together and tell a tight story. So and that's all it should be. right? So that's, we've seen a lot of that happening. Investing in tech, but having really no value, and everyone feeling bad about that.
Yeah. And the worst thing is to have data stuck up in multiple places, paper, some in Excel, some in some application. So yeah, that's an app. Thank you so much for this particular point. Okay, this is like a question which was very interesting, which came. Should I apply for the same grant year after year? As is it that if a grant maker sees, oh my God, they've applied again. I mean, is there any sort of a recollection? Does it work? Doesn't work? What's your take on that? Should you be persistent? Is that looked at positively, or is it like, look, why don't you get a hint that this is not what I want to be part of? So yeah.
I'll say something, and then I think Divya would respond to this much better. But because I've been through the experience, and therefore I'm sharing. I think there's no point applying again unless there's something different being asked, there's something different being proposed, or there's feedback that you've got earlier that you've been able to incorporate and work on. I think unless one of those three things has happened, it's not a lottery. It's rarely a lottery. So I think that is the HCL grant. That's something that comes every year, right? And so many of us apply for it, and so many of us spend time on it. And last year, the organization that I'm in, we wondered what we can do or what to understand better. So again, we did the same thing. It was reach out to someone there, ask, and then realized, okay, actually, the thing is that they're looking for us for organizations in the rural belt. All our proposals have been in urban pockets. We're automatically disqualified. For some reason that wasn't, or we didn't read it, or whatever it is. So, it can be as simple as that. So I would just say ask before you spend time.
Right. So I'll just release a poll question to the audience, and okay. I'm just launching a poll just to understand how many people in your organization are involved in the grant application process. Beginning, Havovi and Divya both mentioned of having a team, and so usually just want to understand the ground reality. Okay, interesting. So I'm just ending the poll now and sharing the results. So interestingly, most of 55% of the audience have one or two people, who are actually going after it. I mean, you can see the results, right? You can see that, right, on the screen. So that is also the reality which is there, because and very interestingly, one person asked a question which I had put for a bit later, but I just feel that is so true. I mean, it's slightly long. I'll just pick it up. So she said, okay, I'm going to say the whole thing as it is. Okay, how can new generation of NGO staffers engage their leaders in productive ways for support during grant application process, as leadership in many grassroots NGOs still stick to old practices, last-minute decisions, relying on sign-offs, not adopting to systemic project management technique. So that's like reality versus what is the ideal situation. So can grant application really happen if it is not top down, or so is it always a top down process, or can the mid management rise up and say, okay, this is how we can probably go about it? Just given these two data points and this question and the poll results, which are like right there.
Go for it. No, go ahead, Havovi.
I don't know. I think it's such a good question. Just the way it's been asked is such a good question. And I was pausing only because I don't know what the answer is. I tend to think now that there needs to be some basic alignment and support from the leadership of the organization. I think it's a very big ask to ask managers and senior managers to do this on their own, it's okay to ask them to do this on their own, knowing that you're on their side. Okay, that's very different from thinking that I have to do this despite the leader of the organization. And I think that if that's a starting point, then it's not a great recipe for to succeed at a grant. And even if you do succeed at the grant, then to implement the grant will become a problem. So in any case, I think that especially I think grants are really, it's not even about it, it's not even about how many people work on it, it's about a collaboration, and it's about convincing and influencing, and how much of that you do internally is so critical to the entire grant writing process. And I think that maybe the skill one needs is to just find the grant that aligns more closely with where the organization is right now, and move the organization along step by step. Because sometimes some of us think that we're ready for a big one, right? And we're not at that stage, which doesn't mean that we won't be there. It just means that we have to start somewhere else. And again, the example, I will share with you. There's this wonderful project which is called the Audacious Goal, a TED grant. And we were in the organization that I was in, we had different opinions on whether we should apply for it or not. And the first time I think we applied for a quote unquote new concept. We were not there. We did not make it, but I'm sure that organization in today's day and age, or perhaps next year, if they were to apply, they'd probably stand a really good chance to get the grant, simply because it's moved along, And I think to any grant writer, I would say it's not about a fight internally. If it's going to be a fight internally, don't take that step just now. Start somewhere else and, go slowly.
Yeah. Thank you for being so candid and all. And, it's taking the question by its heart. Yeah. Divya, anything that you want to add over and above?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So at least both from a grant, someone who has received grants, I think definitely we look for the voice of leadership in the grant, right? Because a grant. I remember the number of times we've talked about this organization having a dynamic leader or a dynamic leadership team, even better, right? An iconic leader is also slightly scary. But because if the leader leaves, then what happens if it's a 5-year grant, right? So we constantly talk about a really good leadership team that works together. And so we need to see that leadership team, and which means that they need to be involved, right? So it's pretty critical from that point of view. The other thing is, like I said, if we need to craft, I've also seen several proposals where the numbers don't talk to the narrative, or they are literally written in like they're two bits that are stuck together and they don't really fit, right? And so when we are like looking at the numbers and we're looking at the narrative, we are like, we're not able to make sense of it. Now that actually happens where somebody who has a little bit more of a bird's eye view is able to look at it, right? Or you have the fabulous luxury of the fundraisers knowing, or let's say the finance people knowing the program in and out, and the program people understanding finance in and out. It's a great situation. It's not always possible. But the thing is, it is the leadership team or that level that has that bird's eye view and has the ability to make those, and that's their job, to make those connections and make those connections seamless. So from starting, like the strategic question that Havovi said as to, should we apply for this grant? Should we do this? I think basically having a very, your tentacles in actually crafting the overview. Where you may have teams who provide all the content, put it all together and stuff. So and having been on the other side in a program team, I think to expect them to write it's not going to happen. But I would certainly say whoever's crafting the grant, that 1 or 2 people should get at least 45 minutes with the leadership as a meeting to say, let me present to you the contours of this grant. This is what they want. This is what we are presenting. What are we missing? And, how can we make it stronger? Right. And so at least get that information before you submit it to the leadership. because it's quite disheartening for the leadership to kind of make a whole lot of changes and you go back to the drawing board. So have that short conversation, allow that to inform the crafting of the grant, and create time at the end again to close the grant and make it feel like they own it. Because if the reason I'm saying is that this if the funder wants to have a conversation, it will happen at some point. They will have a conversation with thing. The fact that the leadership knows everything about the grant is a huge plus. Instead of them saying that, I'll just call my person who wrote the grant, I don't know very much about it. And that is a very negative, sends a very negative vibe. So it is great if, and especially the finance person can talk about the program, and the finance head and the program head can talk about, the numbers broadly. It's a fabulous situation to be in.
Yeah, it's very, very cohesive approach to the grant application from a maker's perspective. Now, taking us a bit of a detour now, looking at the current COVID situation, what has been your experience with the overall grant? Has it has a grant increased? Has it shrunk? Has it shifted to something which is slightly different in terms of focus? So what has been the on-ground experience for for both of you? Havovi, if you could take that, because that is
Sure. We just recently did the numbers on this, and really interestingly, some of the risks balanced out in terms of some of the extra grant that we received for COVID relief. So in, I think, the middle of April, I was very worried that we would have 25% or so less of annual number, simply because we had funders rapidly withdrawing their commitments to us right at that stage. It was quite an experience. But over the next few months, I feel, as the sector and especially as significant philanthropists figured out what role they wanted to play in this very rapidly changing scenario, and there has been, I have to say, in the sector, such a conversation about commitments to communities, commitments to grants. Not everybody has been able to live through those. I know that. We've experienced that. But there has been quite a lot of open discussion and open accountability demanded from the funding community. And I think that's a really good thing. It's a sign of a really good, vibrant sector, I think. And so where we are sitting right now, just in terms of STCI, is a little bit higher than what we had projected at the beginning of the year, simply because so much money came in for COVID relief. So just in sheer numbers, that's the story. But there is another part of the story, which is that, especially in fact on our grants, there are things that we costed for, right? So meetings with stakeholders, disseminations of significant reports that we're releasing, or for example, we work so much with the girls and women in shelters across Maharashtra. So face-to-face stakeholder engagements, developing what we're calling a victim participation index. So much of this kind of work. Now that kind of work all happened online. So the cost that we budgeted for all that just goes away, right? I mean, that becomes what is called underspend. Now what's happened is that most grant makers have requested us to extend the course of the grant, but with the same amount of money. Yeah. So we've done that. It's in mathematical terms, it's possible, and we have done it. But what that means is that the money that you received for 12 months, now you're using the same money for 18, 20 months. So actually what it means is that for the 12 months, you have less money, right? And I was, because we just did this for a meeting, I was just looking at those numbers and thinking, oh my God, why did I not think that this would be a repercussion? And it will have repercussions on many things. It will have repercussions on staff. It will have repercussions on programs. It will have repercussions on how you report, what your numbers are, how people look at you as an organization, everything, And I just think that I don't know how many of in the audience will experience that. It's just something that we have experienced, and I thought it's important to share.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I think it's been a difficult time, and many conversations that even I have had. Something which I realize is even the COVID money or the relief that people have got, they're not necessarily backed with an admin fee. So it's not like they've actually managed to pay salaries from that. It's been pretty much a pass through. So that's another challenge which I'm sure many organizations would focus on, would also relate to. But in terms of focus, I mean, I'll also add one more element to this, because this is something which Amrit earlier mentioned. How is the whole impact investing, or that particular space, is that space growing in the current grant landscape? Is it that there's a shift, or is it that the whole the shares are the same and the grant has shrunk? So just want to understand, from a social entrepreneur perspective as well, because NGOs obviously have that, but many people have gone into the impact, the creating impact, or social entrepreneurs who are actually doing something on the ground. So have you seen anything around that in terms of trend, in terms of impact investing increasing? Divya?
Okay, to be honest, that's not something that I have enough of an understanding in terms of a trend to kind of, say something sensible. No, I mean, just in terms, sorry, I don't have that much understanding of how things have shifted in the impact space. So I don't want to comment on that, but I just wanted to say that from a funders, from ABPI, I was talking to my old colleagues there, and at ABPI, we had this strange situation of we were pushed to make sure we gave, right? Our targets were how much we could give. Right. And it's a very strange situation, because when you're sitting where you are, I mean, like in a non-profit, you're like, nobody has money to give. And here we're like, we are supposed to give maybe 2 or 200 crores or whatever. And now we're not able to give, and we're not meeting targets of being able to give. Right. And it's for a whole host of reasons. Right. So it's very strange. But I think what happened during COVID was very interesting in ABPI, because and ABPI would take anywhere between 3 to 6 months to get a grant going, right? And this is a fairly simple grant, because there's a lot of due diligence and things like that. But during COVID, I think it stripped a lot of those processes down and made it very, very lean. And I know that there were grants that went out in 3 weeks, which is fantastic for an organization which is, I used to think, very sleepy and meticulous, but like was painful for the other side. So the thing is, I think that is a lot of learning for a lot of the funders to basically say, quickly tell me what can we do. And once you know what you want as a funder, and the organization says, these are all the communities that we work with, and we can actually do all of this, then it becomes very, very simple. And so the grants are going on really, really fast. But again, those fast grants went to people who are already grantees. So because then the trust factor is established, everything is established. And for new people, again, it's a little bit of this thing. So I think there's no shortcut to, you have to get your foot into the door and build that one relationship. And which is why you need definitely more than one person to build those relationships. It can be anyone. So, and if you are 10 people in the organization, if there are 5 people who will commit a small amount of time to at least getting your foot in the door and having conversations, whoever may write the final proposal, it is totally worth it, because those relationships will pay fruit at some point, or the other, because it is about building that trust. There was no two ways about it.
Right. So that's we also briefly spoke about, we actually spoke about budgeting in terms of how that is very, very critical. So in fact, one of the questions that we received was around, suggestions and tips for budgeting, how to go and factor that in the proposal. But I'm just wondering, can I make it a bit more specific? And I'm very curious to understand, if is there any benchmark? If there are 2 NGOs who budget, how do you really compare? I'm just like coming from a complete outsider's perspective. So what, and you as and this is a question to you, Havovi, as well as Divya, because from Divya, when you are looking at 2 proposals where the budgeting is very, very different, where the narratives are broadly same. Like what works for you, and Havovi, what approach would you take on a maybe on a conservative basis, so that at least you know that your costs are covered, your headcounts are covered. So what are the tips on the budgeting space actually? Yeah. So from both perspective.
Yeah, it's there's you have to. The only thing I would say to anybody doing it for their own organization, for your own budget, is not to be too hard on yourself. Compare like with like. There are organizations who will achieve the outcomes that you're achieving. Sorry, achieve the outcomes that you're achieving at a lower cost, but maybe they're more technology based. Maybe they don't work in an Adivasi area. Just give me 1 second. Sorry. So the so I mean, I would say when you're comparing or when you're setting benchmarks for yourself, of course look at domain, but also look at geographical area, also look at the kind of intervention it is, and then compare. Because simply saying there are education programs that cost 650 and why does my program cost 5,000 rupees, that doesn't help you. It's not going to help you, it's not going to help the team, that kind of thing. Having said that, I think it's an ongoing internal exercise that organizations have to do, especially in today's scenario. If your program is very high cost, if you're doing niche programming, yeah. So, for instance, the kind of programming that we do with survivors of trafficking, there we don't do a cost per beneficiary. I mean, that's absurd to think about it like that. But when you're doing at scale programs, right, you're improving education outcomes for a group of children aged 6 to 11, let's say, then that is going to be a factor. When people look at the program, cost is going to be a huge factor. And that's partly because the landscape in the education sector in that age group has moved so quickly. So it's really important, and this is not just about grant writing, it's general about organization survival and health, that you know what the competition, loosely putting it, but what other people who are doing similar programs are doing, how they're doing it, what costs they're keeping up with. And the person I used to report to earlier, the CEO I was reporting to earlier, was really fussy about this. And every 3-4 months used to insist that we look at other organizations, see what they're doing, and benchmark ourselves in some ways. Having said that, all that's really important. I just want to say one word of caution here, because some of us have organizations which are 30, 40, 50 years old. We have staff who've been there for many, many years and play very foundational roles in the organization, but they may not be leaders, but their salaries will be higher than new people that you will hire at that level, right? Uh, though for those staff, you have to take like a double pronged approach. You cannot cut salary, but you have to try and upskill staff. I think that's really important, because otherwise you come to a point where your budgeting is just untenable. And all these things I'm saying, Santosh, your question was about grant making and budgeting, but the question is actually about organization planning and budgeting. Only if that piece is happening, then during your grant writing process, it will make any sense.
And yeah.
Yeah, just to add, so one way to think of it is, I mean, if you're going to build that proposal, is what we look for is a unit costing, right? So to break down whatever your plan is into a unit and first articulate what is that unit. So for example, like if you take the example, we were granting around 6 organizations of 5 or 6 who were working on adolescent girls, right? And adolescent girls, and the whole idea was that girls should have completed education, so they should have passed 10 standard, and they should have done these successive steps, and that would delay marriage, and there would be much more agency with a certain quality of that education as well. So now the question is, there were some organizations whose unit, and they worked across different states. So some organizations' unit was the Gram Panchayat. So they said, we will work on so many panchayats. And the panchayat became the unit. So in a panchayat, there'll be X number of schools, or there'll be 1 senior primary and 1 junior school, whatever it is, right? So they have an idea, and how many children, how many boys, how many girls, you will have an idea of what your unit comprises of. right? And what it takes for you to do your program in that unit becomes very clear, because you've done it and you know, and the people on the ground are the best. They'll give you all the numbers of that. So you know what your unit is. Whereas another organization said the school was the unit, right? And so they said so many schools, so many higher secondary and so many primary. So the thing is, it's where as funders, I think we have to be responsible, and that's what we would try not to compare, because sometimes it's very complicated to try and make a comparison, right? Of course you're tempted, because when you go to the board and the board will ask you what is the cost per child here and what is the cost per child there, right? And you will see huge differences, massive differences. And we had a job of explaining why that difference was. But I think a responsible funder should not ask the non-profit, tell me why your cost per child is less than somebody else, because you don't even know what somebody else's cost per child or their budgets are, right? But it was, we had to do some rationalizing, because otherwise, like I said, to a board who is not very plugged into this world, we had to be able to explain why something was so drastically different, and that was our job. But I feel like if we get down to that unit costing and you get that really packed, then making budgets are just, especially if it is a scalable kind of piece of work. If it's very diverse, then of course unit costing will help only for that piece of work, and then of course you may do some policy work, you may do some, and this is again in terms of service based organizations, right? So one of the big, I mean, something that we've not touched upon, and maybe you want to later, is basically that the kind of work you're doing also determines the funding, right? So if it's service delivery of a certain kind, like Havovi talked about education and trafficking, right? One is almost, it can be, said that we will do these 5 activities in a particular geography for so long and achieve this in education. Whereas with trafficking, like who knows how many girls you would have to reach out to. So to build that, like, to streamline a unit and then extrapolate it, because you don't know that, suddenly there may be a crazy situation and the number of places that end up being raided, or there may be a sudden situation, there are so many girls that you have to attend to, or there are young girls who are crossing the border or something. So the thing is, and also it's slightly more in campaign mode, and there's a rights based focus to it. So all these things, leave it very open ended. So when we're talking about service delivery and a program, it's one way of budgeting, which is this unit costing approach and things like that. But when we're talking about rights based work, campaigning, doing some level of public mobilization towards a demand, that kind of thing, or some trying to stop a development project coming and uprooting lands of people, those kind of projects require totally different way of thinking, both about the proposal as well as everything. I think so far we've largely been focused on issues like education, health, and things like that, right, which have a certain mode.
Absolutely. So from an organizational perspective, of course, very, very critical to look at it from an organizational perspective in terms of monitoring costs and focusing on that unit and managing the the resource cost optimally there. So before I move to the closing feedback, there's one question which came in, is that, is it possible for an individual to apply for grant? Have you ever have had individuals apply for grant and the person has received the grant? Has it ever happened?
So basically, the only place that I know of that happens is where it's a fellowship, right? There are a lot of organizations and a lot of funders that offer fellowships, either for leadership to kind of build a particular organization, like the Ashoka fellowships that actually went out. Then there are a lot of others who do this kind of work. So, and there it is because they want to invest. There are certain kind of people, and sometimes it happens also in the campaigning space or in the activism space, where you can't, it's too complicated to fund the whole movement, right? And the movement is not even registered. They don't necessarily have a bank. I mean, there are lots of issues. So what you do is you give fellowships, and it's basically every year you pay the salary of 1 or 2 people in that space. and you find a way to report on that. So most even at the philanthropy, we did have some bits of fellowship work. So everybody has a mix. So again, in the kind of proposal, what kind of entities would you fund would be something that would be very apparent for each funder would put it up front. So whether it is a for profit, not for profit, whether they give fellowships and things like that. I think in my understanding, that's the only way. But because you can't be a sole non-profit member. So.
Right, right. So Havovi, we've had very, very insightful conversation over the past hour. What would be the tips that you would leave the audience with as your closing remarks?
I don't know about closing. I think these are never discussions that can be closed unless you get the grant, which is when it's like hallelujah time. But there are just two things I want to just share. The first is that uh, social media has democratized a lot of information and understanding and learning for all of us. Uh, I'd say that there's a way to use it very wisely and very smartly. You get to know in the space that you're working in what other people are saying, what issues they're taking up, what slogans are being used, or what advocacy points people are driving. I think it's really important. It's just important to know what your context is, and I feel that that social media platforms help you to do that. I'm not yet a cynic about those platforms, and I think that there's a great virtue in reading other organizations' blogs, listening to what other organizations' leaders are saying, going on to events where other organizations are speaking, not just funders. We tend to go a lot to organizations where funders are speaking. It's really important to go to organizations where our peers are speaking, because there's so much that we just learn from each other and from each other's failures and successes. And there's so much more openness now to sharing those things. So I think there are innovative ways to do these things. So for an organization to host a Twitter chat or a Facebook Live, some kind of conversation on a Facebook Live, any kind of thing like that doesn't cost you at all. And there's no language barrier in these things. And it's a great way to have different kinds of people participate in these conversations and to build your own capacity. What this does is it feeds into the big pieces that Divya has been talking about, what your fundraising strategy is. A simple example for me is, I've the number of times I listened to Ashif Sheikh from Jan Sahas simply to understand how that man does it. And not that I have utter respect for him, but I find him a very smart thinker. He thinks on his feet, thinks of very innovative ways of fundraising. I've not seen someone like that in a long time, and this is a field, it is an activist kind of person. So it's very, so I'm saying there is learning to be had from that, and I don't think and we should be more and more open to that kind of thing. So I would suggest be as innovative as you can, and keep your eyes and ears open. And along the same thing, the same pattern of thing that I'm saying is, when be careful. I think we can be much more careful when we decide to apply for a grant. And when we do decide to apply, or even before we decide to apply, we should ask questions, because it is the job of the people who are running the grant to give the money, right? So they will answer questions. So just be clear about what you're asking. So don't ask generic questions like, what do I need to do to get this grant? That won't get us anywhere. But for example, will you fund a project in Chandrapur that, is that outside of your scope of area? That's a question. So I think just definitely ask questions. And I think the last thing I'll just say is, I'll repeat, something that we've talked about earlier, which is grant writing is, it's a very collaborative process. And when I say collaborative, I mean it's co-created. Yeah. So in many of these grant applications, the funder is with you through the way, along the way. Once you cross the intent to apply stage, the funder will literally sit with you and brainstorm your logic model and everything like that. Those are great opportunities for organizational growth. So those kind of opportunities shouldn't stay restricted to one or two or three people in the team. They involve the larger team and use that as a collaborative space to grow and build organization. Every grant, I think, is an opportunity for organization building, and it's come from personal experience. Just one last thing: as wonderful as it is to succeed, it's that heartbreaking to fail, especially when a lot of effort goes in. So the only thing I would say is, especially for leaders, to be really kind when the failure happens. I mean, along the way, we can drive each other bananas doing the application. But when you fail, you don't fail as a grant writer, right? You fail as an organization. So I think to jointly own that and to treat it as a learning exercise is really important.
Okay. So, yeah, so I was just thinking, I mean, the most exciting thing for me in Azim Premji Philanthropy was that with every organization, I started meeting fundraisers, right? And I mean, and there are all kinds of people in organizations, but the most successful fundraisers, or the people who and I have one of them, Arunaba, who works with me, who I mean, and I think the one unique skill that they have is they're persons, right? So they're just brilliant with people and building relationships and having long conversations and helping out, right? And I've seen that literally across organizations, and it's amazing. So I think that there is some sort of support that you see. So for example, Arunava will know everybody in the fund, all the fundraising directors of or teams in various organizations, and that's a fantastic place to plug in, because I think there's a lot of sharing, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of energy, and these are people who get a real high from getting a grant, from getting connections, from opening doors. So I think there's a huge world out there, because we're stuck in the program, we're not meeting, and there are amazing people, and these people speak very evocatively about the program, but they also have a huge world out there of experience. So I feel like that is one group that you must get to know, and you must contribute to and share information. So because then it kind of you stop reinventing the wheel. And a lot of these consultants that are out there, some of the really good ones, are people who have been fundraisers, and they're the best. They've been fundraisers and they worked, and so they've built relationships with potential donors. So they know that world very, very well. So I think to first would be, get yourself a seat or inhabit that world. And right now that world is on Twitter, that world is on LinkedIn, that world is everywhere virtual as well. So I would say that world, get into that world. And the second is, as you're building your program plans, build an equal and opposite fundraising plan, which is strong and which is completely backed by the organization. The other thing is, in fundraising, if you don't invest, you don't get. Right? People feel they shouldn't put in 1 rupee into fundraising. They should put in all the money. So we always say that, so I now work more in individual fundraising. And every time people get money, which is unrestricted, I keep saying, put it back into fundraising, because your fundraising will grow. And nobody thinks of putting money back into fundraising. And I think that's critical, to start by putting some money into fundraising and then growing that. Because if you invest in it, the kind of benefits that you have for the long term, for crisis, etc., is phenomenal. So the second would be that entire thing of getting the internal culture to see fundraising as just the other side of program. And if you want the program to succeed, everyone has to be involved in this. And then being able to craft that master story, which is both in numbers, in words, in all sorts of ways that you can tell those stories, and being able to tell it in Twitter in a few characters, but to also be able to write a page about it. So for the organization to be able to tell their story in a very, very powerful way. And that's what I've seen of some of these fabulous leaders as well, who are great fundraisers. So to do that, and then to really, once you get into like Havovi said, have those conversations and build those relationships towards closing those fundraising proposals, right? Yeah, I think that would be it.
Wow. So I'm feeling very energized and motivated. This has been like a pep talk plus like loads and loads of information. This is also getting recorded. So for people who could not join, we'll make it available. So thank you so much, Havovi and Divya. I've stolen a quote which says, "Knowledge is like money, and to be a value, it must circulate." This is like one of the and in circulation, it will always increase and hopefully grow in value. So that is what we intend to achieve. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we will have a bunch of we have a bunch of guys who are all ready to go and who know exactly what to do and to face the grant world. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I put in that a chat link of the name of the organization I was talking about, who does the
Sure.
mapping of grants, so you can take a look at it.
Sure.
Okay, great.
Okay then. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.